So the agenda for today, the initial welcome, we probably have more people on the call than we want to have introduce themselves, but we have good representation from mostly customers of ours, and then there are a couple of folks that are interested in Varasset. We have both pole owners and some attachers on the call, so it should make for an interesting dynamic. The major topics we're going to cover are Fulcrum integration, which is a mobile tool used out in the field, and then we're going to get into one-touch make-ready. And again, at the end of that, we definitely want to facilitate audience participation. Then we'll do some additional questions and answers and discuss what the group is interested in for future topics. One moment here. Okay, so I'm going to tag out to Austin here. He's going to talk through Fulcrum. Take it away.
Thanks, Dave. So what is Fulcrum? So Fulcrum is a field data collection tool. It's one of many. The reason we're talking about it today is because we do have a partnership with Fulcrum, but we've also integrated with other collector tools, and we're more than happy to do it with whatever tool you are currently using or planning on using in the future. It's configurable data collection software. Basically, it gives you the power to configure apps that can be accessed from the field using an Android or iOS device, like data that best meets your needs. It's also a cloud-based subscription as well. Some of the activities that you'd potentially be using Fulcrum for would be anything from construction activities, site survey, inspections, preventive maintenance, quality assurance, safety inspections, you name it. Fulcrum can have the ability to capture data or complete these activities in the field. So some of the key Fulcrum features that help support your needs would be that it's a map-based data collection tool. So it allows you to not only access your apps in the field, but also have a visual representation on a map in the field. It also has offline support, meaning that you do not need to be online in order to collect data while you're in the field. You can simply sync your app, get your apps that you need, collect data, and then once you're back in range, you can sync your app again. The forms are completely customizable, giving you the power to collect the targeted data that you need, more specifically to the data that you're going to be collecting out in the field. So yeah, it has really good user traceability. You can access the metadata just from the front end and see exactly who's been using a record, who created it, who made updates, and it's all time stamped as well. It's an inexpensive app and it's quick to launch, basically meaning that if you did decide to pull the trigger on Fulcrum, you could quickly configure your app, launch it, and begin collecting data in a very short period of time. And it's also extensible through the API.
Yeah, by the way, I want to point one thing out here.
Yep.
As positive as all that is, we're not here trying to sell Fulcrum. It's just a very good example of a quick and easy to spin up mobile data collection app. A number of you on the phone know we've integrated with a lot of different mobile tools and apps. So this just makes a good example. We don't want to pitch it too hard.
Yep. Thanks, Dave. So here on this slide, this is just kind of an idea of what it would look like, the workflow for a field data collection in the field. So basically, you have your two systems here. Your work management system would be used to basically initiate your form or your work order. You would plan, and then you would assign and dispatch the work, which then could be accessed from your field tool upon syncing their application. They could then get their work, perform the work, collect the data, and then sync that app in order to push the data back to your work management system. So before we get in here, I'm going to kind of go through a specific example of what this would look like using Varasset. and the Fulcrum app. So
I'd like to throw in one thing for audience members who may not be clear on one of the terms that Austin used. So disconnected mode, what that means is you don't have to have a live connection. So if you're running Fulcrum or something similar on your Android phone and you're up in the hills and you have no cellular connection, running in disconnected mode means it caches the data locally.
Okay.
The app still runs, you can function. That is not true with all applications. Some of them need a live connection.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So I'm going to switch over to Varasset. So this is what a Varasset work order looks like. Some of you may be familiar with this. I'm just going to kind of go over a brief overview of some specific elements that could be pushed to your field collection tool. So this is not everything. All the data, all the records that I'm not going to cover every record that could potentially be pushed to Fulcrum or whatever your tool may be, just kind of some key stuff. So this is the Varasset work order. This first tab that we're looking at here is what we would call the summary tab. You can see here that has a worker ID, your description. If you look at the assignments, you can assign the specific person or crew that is going to be performing the work in the field. This would be kind of what would help initiate or assign or dispatch that work in the field. You have some other cost details. You can also upload permits that have been scanned directly to the Varasset work order that could then be accessed in the field using your field tool. You can also have file attachments. So your file attachments could be anything from images that were collected in the field or images that you want someone to access while they're in the field. And then my last point here, my last piece here was the work order tasks. So these tasks can be created on the Varasset work order and then pushed to your field tool. These could be anything from key milestones that need to be completed at a specific time, or maybe they're just a checklist for you to do lockout, tagout, or whatever that may look like that for that particular job. And then one other thing before I switch over to the Fulcrum piece, conversation. So any comments that you have pertaining to the work order could be added directly onto the work order at this point, and then again could be pushed over to your field tool where it could be accessed and viewed, and vice versa. So any comments or conversation pieces that would be captured in the field could be captured in the field, and then once you sync your app, could be pushed back to the work order. So that's the Varasset work order piece. So switch back over to our PowerPoint here. We were going to show you the Fulcrum app, but we were having issues with our mirroring tool, so we just decided to go through. I'll walk through some key screenshots of the Fulcrum app. So here's what you. This was an app configured in Fulcrum that we configured as the work order. So basically, this is the linked work order to the Varasset work order. So once you open your app, there's kind of two key ways you can view your records. First, if you want, you can have this little browse screen, or what Fulcrum calls is their list view. Or if you select the your map view, it switches over and gives you a map view of all your records. So these are the same records, but they're just two specific views. Let's see here, sorry. Also, if you notice here, you'll see the little green check mark. This kind of tells you or signals to you whether this record has been synced. So say you're in the field, you collect some data, and you can save it, but it hasn't been synced yet. So once you're back in range, you would click this little circle icon with the arrows, and it would sync. And then these signify whether the record's been synced. Also, too, Fulcrum, since you can configure several different types of apps, if you have more than one, you would just select this work order at the top here header, and a list view of all the different apps that you would potentially want to use in the field would appear there. So
by apps, you could have different inspection types assigned to different crews. You could have work order execution tasks, each of which could be segregated by creating a separate app. And by the way, the screenshots that he shows here, I don't know if these are Android or iPhone. It'll run on either one of those operating systems. So this could be a tablet, it could be a cell phone. It's pretty flexible.
Yep. Thank you. So once you open your record, it kind of starts out, again, there's kind of two specific ways you can look at this. First is, again, just directly looking at the data of that record. So this one on the left here. Or on the right, if you select the map, this little target up here, it'll actually give you a pinpointed view of that record of where it's at on the map based on its location. But looking at the data here, this is really kind of the header of it, the specific, just high-level header summary data elements for this record. Just like Varasset, Fulcrum supports a numerous data types. So basically, when you're configuring your app, you get to choose which type of data you want, whether it's a free-form string field, or if it's a date field, or whatever it may. Whatever your needs are, you get the power to choose. It also, when you're configuring your app or your form, it has field level edit rules. Basically, you can configure different validation, whether it's required before you save, or whether it's something that needs to be populated before you change the status. You have the power to do that with this form.
And most importantly, it shows you where the nearest Starbucks is.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah. Also, too, again, just like Varasset, has a very complex related record structure. So basically, if you look at this, the two screenshots we have here, you can see tasks, permits, conversation file attachments. Basically, what you're seeing here is several related records all being viewable here on the work order. So again, if you remember in Varasset, I pulled up the permits tab. You could, those permits could have been added in the back office using Varasset, and then once this crew member had synced his app, he could view those permits from here. Another important piece is the task. So if you remember again in Varasset, we talked about the different tasks, the milestones or the checklists that were created in Varasset for that work order. Those appear here from your app using Fulcrum. And again, from the app, you can actually open these records, these tasks, and complete them in the field, and again push that data back to Varasset. So it has a pretty complex data structure that's very reportable and it's good for collecting data. So this next kind of another important piece is attachments. So from the attachment at the bottom there of the work order, you from the field, again, you can do this all offline. You can capture photos, videos, and audio all from the field, upload it to your app, and then upon syncing, push it to back to your work management system. And again, comments. So the same thing. You can capture comments while in the field. Put your name on it. Whatever the comment may be, and then it even gives it a date as well. And again, upon syncing, it gets pushed to the field app or to your work management system. So with that was kind of the end of the demonstration. I was gonna send it over to the Dave to talk about the one-touch make ready. Yes.
So I don't know if we still have everybody muted, but maybe we can unmute them, Dave, and then ask if there are any questions about Fulcrum. Are we unmuted? Okay, we are unmuted. Any questions, please?
Or they can do chat too if they prefer.
Deafening silence. Okay, on to the stuff that I suspect people are here for. Okay, so I'm going to run through a number of slides here. I'm going to try and do this relatively quickly, and then at the end, I want to open. I think you can hear me now, I hope. Okay, good. I accidentally muted me, which is probably a good idea. So, One Touch Make Ready. So what I plan to do is run through a number of, oh, wait a minute, sorry, we've got a question for you. If the tablet loses power, Dave, can you see that?
Yeah, if the tablet loses power, does the information not synced get lost?
Here, and it's Matthew, I can answer that question. The data is saved to your device locally, so the data will not be lost. If you lose power, if you run out of battery charge, the next time you charge it up, it'll still show as not synced, and as soon as you sync it up, the data will still sync up to your back office.
Good question.
Yep.
Any other questions on that? No? Okay. Okay. One Touch Make Ready. So I think most of you are aware of this, but the FCC order that just went into effect last Monday, the 20th, has a number of different implications for the joint use industry. And I'm not going to try and cover all of this. There's quite a bit, and it would keep us busy for a long period of time. But the key components that apply to this element of the industry are some changes to the existing access process, the introduction of self-help policies, and specifically the One Touch Make Ready, which we'll dive into deeper, and the corresponding overlashing. I kind of see those as two parts of the same thing, and we probably won't dig into the pre-existing violations. That's basically a done deal. So, next question is what states or where geographically does this apply? So we built a little map here. The 30 states that are covered by the FCC are represented in blue. The remaining 20 states are red. They're called self-certified, meaning they certify that they have their own sets of standards and processes. I'm sure a lot of you on the phone are aware the red ones, there are shades of gray there. So California with GO95, Oregon with the OJUA standards, they really do have a pretty comprehensive set of codes. As you get into Idaho and some of the others, including Washington where we are, they are self-certified, but they adopt a fair number of the components of the FCC. So even if you're not in an FCC mandate state, you still need to be aware of what's going on. Okay, general parameters around the FCC's One Touch Make Ready. The key of this is the attacher or their approved contractor can perform the attachment work in the field, which includes moving communication equipment owned by the utility or by other attachers. And as long as it's within the communication space, they're allowed to do that. And we are quite aware that that causes some heartburn for some of the incumbents that are already on the pole, the fact that somebody else will be touching their stuff. The One Touch Make Ready as an option is available only to cable TV and non-ILEC telecoms. It specifically applies to simple make ready, meaning change out, no work in the power space, and in the communication space only. So effectively, if something be done outside of the communication space, that disqualifies it for One Touch Make Ready, drops it into the complex queue or the traditional queue, and therefore it would not be One Touch Make Ready. So some requirements here. The pole owner is required to modify the existing processes, assuming you have a software platform in place, of course, but also if you have a semi-manual process. So you have some revised shot clocks, you have different timelines. We won't dig into too much detail on that because those of you that are already Varasset users, you probably recognize that changing a duration on a shot clock is a pretty easy thing to do. But we do want to talk about the business implications. So software-wise, this is pretty easy to implement. Business-wise, this can have major implications for you going forward. So you need to think that part through. So other pole owner mandates, you are required to give the applicant the choice of traditional or One Touch Make Ready, and assuming, of course, they qualify for One Touch Make Ready. Now, the order encourages the owner to establish contractor criteria and also provide an approved contractor list. It doesn't mandate that, but it does strongly encourage that, and make of that what you will. So one change, the poll owner has 15 days from the receipt of complete application, meaning everything's in order, to either approve or deny the request. And if the poll owner deems that this is not a simple, so it's not simple make ready, it's not just in the communication space, they have the ability to push back and it goes down the traditional queue, so the regular workflow. A couple more parameters here on the attacher side. So of course they would be required to request the one-touch make ready application option. They do have an option there. They are mandated to complete the necessary poll surveys in the communication space only. They have the ability to, or can, move the other communication attachments, again, comm space only, and then they're required to notify the other attachers. Now, the interesting thing there is they are not required to notify through the poll owner. That can be completely independent, and potentially the poll owner is out of the loop on that. The other thing, when we get into overlash, we'll get into more detail on this, but the attacher is required to notify the poll owner, so notify, very key term here, that they're going to be doing an overlash. In the past, an awful lot of the poll owners have required an application for, kind of a permit or a request to do an overlash. Now it's not that. Now it is simply let them know this is coming up. It's coming up in 15 days, and it's basically my asset as a communication provider, and here's what I'm going to do. Along with that, they have a mandate to 15 days after the construction on the overlash is complete, notify the poll owner that it has been done. And by the way, this applies to third-party overlash. I know that that's not tremendously common amongst our customers, but what that means is if you have Verizon that has an attachment and they choose to contract with Comcast, allow Comcast to overlash on the Verizon attachment, they have an obligation also to notify, but not necessarily go through the poll owner for any additional detail. Next. Okay, software requirements. So if you're already doing your permitting in Varasset, you're quite a ways down the path on this. For most of our customers that are using the permitting processes and interfacing with the internal work capabilities of Varasset, this is really a question of, do we create an additional workflow for this? Do we segregate? Do we create a compound workflow? There are a number of different questions that you will have to answer for yourself, but technically it's pretty quick and easy to do. Again, the implications to your operations and your costs and your policies, that's the big thing. So other requirements, you will be required as a poll owner to categorize and manage the different application types. So your traditional wireline and wireless versus one-touch make-ready versus overlash, they all have different steps, different shot clocks, different limits, different reporting requirements. Do keep in mind on all of this that the lawyers haven't gotten their pound of flesh just yet, so this is still in play, and there is always the possibility that some of these details could change. But as of Monday the 20th, this is in force, and therefore you have to have a way to answer these questions. One question that we hear from the attachers is the concern that if they apply as a traditional attachment versus one-touch make-ready, they get left behind. They get deprioritized in favor of one-touch make-ready, or vice versa. And so it looks pretty clear that you have to have the tracking capability and the audit history in order to prove that you are addressing the permits as they come in, first come, first serve, as much as that's feasible, of course. Obviously the complexity of the application, if they're permitting for 5,000 polls versus 2 polls, one can be completed much more quickly. But it will be important to have dashboards and reporting capability in case there's any kind of an audit. Another topic is the ability to summarize make-ready costs accurately. There is a lot of discussion around this, but the attacher has the ability now to request a line item detail statement. So how far those line items go is really up to the pole owner, but it is something that you need to consider. How do you calculate the make-ready costs? What are your different sources for labor and materials and equipment and everything else that goes into that? And we do have ways to address that in Varasset, but the way you choose to implement that is really up to the individual pole owner. And then finally, the as-built validation of post-construction inspection records versus the proposed make-ready design. So nothing new there, but you just have to keep the history. Okay, next slide. So overlashing, we talked about that, and that again is one of the key changes in the FCC order. So the pole owner is required to inform attachers of the advance notice requirement or include in any new attachment agreements. Now, my take on this is there are probably a lot of smaller attachers that may not be aware of what's been happening with the FCC, and therefore the pole owner is obligated to communicate this expectation. So how far that goes, I don't really know. In the overlashing notification coming from the third-party attacher, the pole owner is not allowed to require engineering specifications or designs, and that's kind of interesting. They also can't recover the engineering review costs, even though there is a pretty good safety reason to do a fair amount of that. The utility or the pole owner does have the ability to determine whether the overlash, within a 15-day period, they have to figure this out. But if they decide that the overlash would create a safety issue, reliability, or pole overloading situation, they push back within the 15-day window, and the attacher must address that before they can continue. Then also the pole owner can't prevent the attacher from overlashing due to existing violations. And again, that's one that's been discussed pretty hot and heavily. After the overlash has been completed, the pole owner has 90 days to perform the post-construction inspection. Within the completion, after the completion of the inspection, they have another 14 days to notify the attacher of any findings, code violations, damages, and so forth. And then, of course, you follow the usual process of making sure that whoever caused the issue reimburses the one that has to deal with it. Next, please. So, overlashing requirements on the attacher. Again, they have to give an advance notice of 15 days prior to actually doing the construction work on the overlash. After it's completed, and I put together a very simple little timeline down here at the bottom. The construction could take who knows how long. It could be a day, it could be a very long period of time. That does not have a timeline attached to it. But after it is completed, they have another 15 days to notify the pole owner that the attachment has been completed. At the end of that, again, the 90 days that the pole owner has to do their inspection, another 14 days to get back to the attacher. So let's see, and this is kind of a continuation of what we said on the previous slide. If the utility can document that the overlash requires modifications to the pole or replacement of the pole, the overlasher is held responsible for the associated costs. So that part really isn't different. Next. Okay, so I'm going to tag out to Matthew because I can't read that. My eyes aren't good enough anymore.
All right, thanks, Dave. So the next couple of slides are going to show some configuration possibilities that you can do within Varasset to help configure Communication Manager to support One-Touch Make-Ready or any attachment request process that you may have. So the main module within Varasset that we do leverage to manage the communication between pole owners and third-party attachers is Communication Manager. So the next couple of slides are in regards to that. Now, the big piece of Communication Manager config is obviously the workflow. So how we actually manage what tasks each party will get and basically the routing of these tasks throughout this attachment request or One-Touch Make-Ready request process. So we do have a workflow engine built into Varasset that we do leverage, and this is a screenshot of the workflow builder, and this is just a sample of a attachment request process where we can actually configure out the steps in the process and include even some decision points along the way, and some system tasks as well. So the system can actually set different statuses or even create work orders if you're using Varasset as a work order management tool as well. So we use Communication Manager for the communication part. If you want to do additional work order planning and execution, you can use the work orders within Varasset as well. Okay. So that's the first piece of configuring Communication Manager, is to configure out the actual business process, the workflow process of working through the attachment request process. The second part of Communication Manager config is the workflow template. So this is a screenshot of Varasset and a screenshot of a workflow template. This is where you can define some of the key header fields that an attachment request process will always use. For example, a custodian, so who's in charge of the actual poll that's being requested against. Usually that would be the poll owner. If there's a certain priority of this specific workflow, you can set that here too. This key field here is the default workflow. So the previous slide shows the business process of walking through this attachment request process. This workflow template defines which workflow you're actually using. So depending on the different types of attachment requests you get, you can set up multiple workflows. So you can have a specialized one-touch make-ready workflow if needed, as opposed to a traditional attachment request workflow. And then when you're setting up this workflow template, you define which workflow you're actually using.
Quick reminder to Matthew, since Austin is presenting, they can't actually see your mouse.
Ah, yes. So thank you for that reminder. So the default workflow is under the details around 6 or 7 fields down. So Austin's mouse is on that. Thank you, Austin.
Yeah.
All right, can you go on to the next slide? All right, once you have the actual workflow set up and you have your template that links the specific business process to the other core header fields that you need created when you're creating a communication record, when you actually create a communication record in Varasset, you're presented with this dialog. This presents you with 2 options: a created by team, which is essentially the company you're creating the request against. So again, as attachers, that would most likely be your attaching company. In the examples where you have contractors that are tasked with creating these communication requests, all of their companies can be included here too, so they have to choose which company they're working as. And then the second field is the template. So that goes back to the previous slide, which actual template you're going to be using, and based on the template, what workflow you're going to be using. So right in this example, we have an attachment request template that triggers an attachment request workflow. In a one-touch make-ready example, we could have an overlash template that triggers a one-touch make-ready overlash workflow. So you define those 2 fields here, and when you click create, you'd actually create that communication record. All right, so here is an example of a communication manager record. So you can see that we do have a couple fields here, very similar actually to the slide that Austin showed earlier in the presentation of what a work order looks like. We have the same basic layout with a summary tab with summary fields. The key thing to note in the upper right-hand corner, Austin, if you would please, you can see that this communication manager record has a workflow running against it, and it's currently in the surveying task. It's assigned to the licensee user, and the status is open. So this record is really used to navigate the communication back and forth and where you're at in the process now. If you go on to the next slide, you can see that you can actually pull up a workflow diagram, and it actually highlights where you are at in the workflow process. So this example actually shows that this communication happens to be in the review and approve section. And if you go to the next slide, once you're done with your workflow step, you just click Advanced Workflow, and if there are decision points along the workflow process, there is actually another dialog that pops up, and this is all done through configuration of the actual workflow on if there's multiple paths to take. which path you'd want the assigned user to take. So this one is in the surveying task. The task can select whether make ready is required, whether they are approved to attach, or whether this request is actually rejected. So depending on how the workflow is configured, we can have different decision points along the way. All right, so the last part of Communication Manager config is actually the edit screen. So I showed you a sample of the edit screens, but here are some different screens that we show that show you that each of the groups, you can order them differently. If there's more fields that you need to cover on a Communication Manager record, you can also add them. You can actually see that we did rename these records. Instead of them being communication records, they are actually request records. So friendly names of fields and where the fields are on the screen, all of that can be configured through our implementation of Varasset with your system. So we can make sure to capture all the data that you need to capture.
Hang on just a second there. We have a question.
I saw that. Let's table that.
Table it? Okay,
Yep.
That's fine. Just want to acknowledge it. So Daryl, we've seen that. We'll touch on it.
So one thing I'd like to add to what Matthew was talking about here, you'll notice that the screen layout and the configuration, the workflows are all very customizable. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this, and that applies both to traditional make-ready and permitting and to one-touch make-ready. The states vary somewhat from state to state. The operational parameters of any given utility change. So even though we are demonstrating kind of a baseline configuration, we understand that this will need to change to accommodate your particular interpretation and your geography.
Thanks, Dave. And actually, this last slide kind of speaks to that. So if you go on to the next slide, beyond just screen layout, we can even change some base colors of Varasset if need be. So our configuration is pretty far-reaching as far as what we can do with the screen. So this is an example of some color changes that we can do as well. All right, so these last two Visio screenshots are just samples of a couple different workflows that we could manage. So this one's a fairly simple one.
Everybody can read that, right?
Even though you can see a lot of boxes and no one can read it, this is a fairly simple one. So this is a sample workflow. If you go on to the next one, you can also do more complex workflows. So a lot more boxes, a lot more lines. So this is another sample workflow that we can accommodate within our workflow engine and through a Communication Manager configuration, support that so that you can get your tasking done and all the traceability that you need.
And these are both actual make-ready workflows, aren't they?
That is correct.
Okay. Even though you can't read them, these are real.
All right, and that is the last slide that I have as far as the configuration of Communication Manager.
Okay, so I want to open it up, and Dave, if you can unmute people. We have a number of topics we could discuss here. I recognize that the attacher perspective is going to be very focused on the liability issue of somebody else touching their stuff. But I'd like to, there are some folks on the call that know a heck of a lot more about one-touch make-ready than we do. Daryl, you want to bring up your comment? Now would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the comment that the pole owner is required to notify the attachers of overlashing is in the order. I don't remember. Now, we kind of asked around. We didn't find that. So if you know where that is in the order, I'd kind of like to see it because
Daryl,
we did not have that understanding.
If I said that, I misspoke. I should have said the attacher is required to notify the pole owner.
I think the slide said the pole owner is required to notify the attachers or something like that, I believe is what I saw.
Then that is my fault. That's not correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Unless you really want to.
We'll leave that up to the new attacher, probably.
So I'm going to throw a couple of things out here to kind of get the conversation started. So for example, do you, as a pole owner, see yourself doing an engineering review of absolutely every one of these attachment requests, knowing that a lot of this is going to be at your own cost? So post-construction inspection, in all cases, for example, is something I have heard from a number of the IOUs. Now, I don't know, that may continue, that may be kind of a temporary thing until they work the kinks out, but it is a significant responsibility. There's also, by the way, the ability for the utility to perform the make-ready work themselves, as long as they hit the specified time limits, and I'd be curious to know if anybody actually plans to do that.
It's probably a little too early to answer that one.
Yeah, Dave, to answer your first question, we're still looking at the risk and cost associated with making that decision on the engineering studies for overlash. We are certainly requiring pole loading studies be done on the front end for all new applications, OTMR and traditional.
Good. Other folks?
I do have a question I'd like to throw out. Is strand-mounted wireless devices, are those considered overlash?
No.
Where does the order state that?
The order doesn't mention strand mounted at all, to my knowledge. So I think it's left to the individual utility.
By the way, if anybody has questions you prefer to ask through chat, we'd be happy to take those and relay them for you. But I do want to kind of get the ball rolling here.
Are you going to be sharing this PowerPoint when this call's done?
I would be happy to do that.
Thank
Who
you.
was it that asked? I could send it out to everybody or just some of you.
I'm sure we all want it, but Linda Fazio is asking for it.
Okay. Please
Yeah,
forgive
this is Don in Las Vegas. I'd like to get that too.
We'll send
Yes,
it,
please. This is Ryan. Thank you.
Okay. But first, I'm going to correct the mistake that Daryl pointed out. So I hear some background conversations. Other questions?
I think, Dave, this is Tom. I think we're going to have a lot more questions later, seeing how new this is and how we're going to move forward with all of this.
So something I would like to point out, I am not an attorney. I've done my best to digest everything in the order. Please don't hold me liable if I had a typo or something in there. But I do think it's very important for our customers to begin digesting this and determining what the implications are for how they want to execute One Touch. So if you catch another mistake, sorry.
Are we piloting this tool? Is there a way to pilot and test it?
Sorry, who was that was asking the question?
Hi, Linda Fazio. Hi.
Well, that's kind of a hard question to answer because each one of our customers implements Varasset a little bit differently. And so, yeah, I don't really know how to answer that question.
So, Dave, this is not an IGIS, the Fulcrum. It's a standalone app, right, that you can use on a tablet?
Let me make sure I understand the question. So Fulcrum specifically, we're going back to the previous topic. Yes, that is, well, it's a standalone app that is launched from the cloud. I think it's www.fulcrumapp.com, is that right? Okay, they're nodding. So you can go out there and take a look at it. It is a subscription-based service. Some of our customers use it, some of the contractors use it. We have found it to be very quick and easy to interface with, so we kind of like that. Again, that's not, we are an Esri partner and we interface with Esri Collector and similar, so we're not trying to play favorites, but it is very easy to get up and running. As I recall, there's a 30-day trial thing where you can sign up for it and play around with it. I was able to figure it out, and if that doesn't tell you something, I don't know what will. So, yeah, I would encourage you to go play around with it, take a look at it, and if you have questions, let us know.
Thank you, Dave.
No problem. And if, by the way, the question about pilot was about Fulcrum, then I misunderstood that. I thought you were talking about One Touch Make Ready. So I'm going to throw this out there since there's a lot of muttering and a lot of absence of questions here. The WI Joint Use Conference coming up in September. I'm going to have a couple of people coming to present on FCC order, and one of them is going to be the guy who came last year from the FCC, the director in the wireline side. He's also bringing along some kind of a senior director from the wireless side, and I couldn't begin to tell you their titles because they all have about 25 words in them. But we expect to have a very spirited discussion there. So as you digest this and you want to bounce ideas off each other, that'll be a pretty good forum, even though it's a couple of months out. And hopefully we will have learned quite a bit more by the time we attend. Do we have any more slides? Okay. So I guess the next question, we do have one more slide, is any suggestions for the next users group, anything that people are particularly concerned about, aside from One Touch Make Ready, and we could always do follow-up on this if needed. Thoughts, ideas, questions? Okay. Let's wrap it up then. If something comes to mind and you have other questions, call us, shoot us an email. We did just get a question. Dave, can you read that one?
Oh, how are you handling giving the notice to the attachers of the write-out?
So I think that's a question for the community, really. And just in case, Dave, the microphone isn't down there, so I'll repeat that. Question is, how do you expect to handle the notification of the write-out? So if you're all going to get in the same truck and go at the same time, how are you going to collaborate on that? Thoughts on that?
That is the question.
All right, this is Jason, MJO Clark PD. All right, so there's a proposal out there that the power company and the communication company write out the routes together that's being proposed for new attachments or overlash, or is this a write out for a post inspection? This is something kind of new to me.
I think it was when the applicant is going to look at the poles. I think there's an opportunity for the attachers on those poles to be there, I think. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. And I think it's up to the applicant to notify them, to give them an opportunity to basically defend their case that some of the work may not be simple versus One Touch Make Ready.
I think Sherry may have the answer.
Yeah, the 3-day write-out is for the attacher to allow all the incumbent attachments to come and be present when they evaluate whether the work in the communication space is simple or complex. And they do that before they submit an application. They can also do that if they want to use the accelerated timeline under the normal process. When the utility that owns the pole is going to go do their field survey on the normal process, they have to give a 3-day notice to allow others to be present. That's the way I read all that.
So
this is Lisa from Pacificor, and that's how I interpreted it as well. And so not only do they need to notify all the other attachers on the pole, but also the pole owner. So it's really the applicant that is driving that. So the 3-day heads up is kind of rough, but it's the applicant that has to coordinate that and provide a date and time that will work for everybody that's interested.
And that is before the actual application, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, it would have to be, because you've got to give them the opportunity to object before they even get to the point of submitting an application, because at application time, they're providing everything about where everyone is, where they're going to be when they're done doing One Touch Make Ready.
I think ideally, the pole owner will have what they consider simple versus complex defined prior to any applications being submitted, but it's the burden of the applicant, excuse me, to note on their application whether or not they're intending for the application to be a One Touch Make Ready application. So right off the bat, they have to state that intent. And so this is an opportunity for them to determine that up front, because they can't mark their application appropriately if they don't know for sure that it will qualify.
okay, so this is Jason again, Clark PUD. I can already foresee a real-world issue we're going to run into is the applicant isn't going to be able to identify everybody on the pole. Let's say there's 4 communication attachments on there. They'll probably be able to name the big ones, let's say CenturyLink and Comcast. But there's a fiber on there. Now, we have our own labeling system here in Clark County, but, that's just us. But let's say it's a school district or a city fiber. There's a lot of places around this nation where fiber optic isn't very well labeled. So, they're going to have to go to the pole owner and bug them and say, hey, can you help me out here? That's kind of the real world of this. Does everybody agree?
It's not all labeled. That's absolutely correct.
Agreed.
Now, Dave, with Varasset, it's my understanding that the state of Oregon's trying to be proactive about this, and maybe they've accomplished this. Weren't you guys trying to assist in establishing a one-point website where any utility could go and click on a pole, and that information would be there, so that attachers, applicants could go get this information themselves? Am I thinking clearly on this? Am I anywhere in the right realm for the state of Oregon?
Yeah, so what we did there was really in support of the Joint Inspection Committee. The idea being that for safety inspections, you end up with a lot of different pole owners and attachers going to the same pole over a period of the same period. So in order to make the map easy, so Jason's talking about the OJUA map, and we collected shape files showing the service territories of each one of the pole owners, and then overlaid that with the inspection areas. So, typically map sections, section by section, we're going to inspect this in 2019, this in 2020, and so forth. It does not get down to the level of the individual poles. And part of the reason for that was the possibility of providing competitive advantage to one of the attachers over another. And I think Jeff Kent's still on the line. So, Jeff, if you want to add anything to that, I'd appreciate it.
Jeff had to drop off.
Oh, is that Lisa?
Yeah.
So, Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything, but so I think that's where we ended up.
Yeah, my understanding is that they're at the point of pilot. They've identified the areas, and so I think that they're just, as far as the joint inspection piece goes. Is that what you mean?
Yes, but that also there is no solution out there that offers the level of detail that you would need for an attacher to go and identify the other attachees on a given pole. California has...
That is correct. There is there's lots of plans for this pole database in the sky. think California is pushing really hard for something of that nature, but to my knowledge, there isn't one that actually exists in any of the states that we serve. There may be like one example over on the East Coast. I think Alden Systems did something like that for like Vermont or like for a specific state, specific to like pole butt removals. They had a double wood problem over there, and so they have a solution similar to what people are describing, but I don't think there's anything in our service territory, at least, that exists like that.
Dave, this is Stuart Sloan, and yes, you're right. The resolution is only to the service territory level, and overlaying territories in the to assist in planning inspections and coordinating inspections if possible. That's my understanding.
Thank you. So we're right up on the 11 o'clock mark.
There is one more question there, Dave. Do you see it? It says, are you providing the one-touch make-ready workflow as you understand it to existing customers? And I think the answer would be that would be a starting point to discuss their particular situation.
Yeah, as a baseline, we haven't sketched out the one-touch make-ready workflow. It's pretty straightforward. But yeah, over the next couple of weeks, we should have that pretty stable, and we would be able to offer that as a baseline starting point. And the assumption on that, I think, would be there would be a separate workflow, a separate application, as opposed to just adding another couple of check boxes and fields on the existing application. But I'll talk that over internally. Okay, well, thank you all very much. We will hopefully hear the rest of you on the next users group meeting, which, Dave, when do we think that'll be?
It'll be first week in October.
First week in October. So we'll send you the invitation as soon as we're certain about the details. And thank you all.